Welcome, Mayor. Thank you so much for being here. First, I want the audience to know that it was actually a conversation that you and I had a little more than a year ago. We were happily placed next to one another at a dinner, and I just turned to you and I said, so what's consuming your time? What are you caring about in these days in San Jose? And you began to tell me about what was happening, that it was really a tale of two cities. So thank you for helping us galvanize this gathering, number one. And I want to start, you want to get your earpiece back on?
I'll fetch it.
Okay, good. The dangers of technology.
Yes.
I shouldn't say that in this crowd. I want to start with the question of the have and have-nots in the Valley. And just to talk about San Jose, where I gather there are more people living in poverty in your city than live in Mountain View and Palo Alto combined.
Yeah.
What's going on?
You know, if you took the bottom quintile of households, we'd see average income of about $22,000. In a city of 1 million, that's well more than 200,000 people. So you get the sense of the scale of poverty here in the midst of the most plentiful, abundant valley on the planet, and it starts to illustrate just how great our challenge is. We just saw the tragedy in Oakland, what happened to the ghost ship, and yet, there, but for the grace of God, go any city in this valley or in this Bay Area where we've got thousands of families living in garages, and they simply have no choice. And we can certainly get out there with a whole team of code enforcement officers, but that's not going to solve the challenge that those families are facing.
I'm going to fix your mic.
Thank you.
I think that's better. How's that? Does that
Fantastic.
feel better? Good.
Thank you. I feel better now.
Good. It's a terrible feeling. When last time I was here, I took an Uber for a business meeting, and I got out of the Uber, and the gentleman walked around to get my suitcase out of the trunk, lifted the trunk up, and at the bottom of the trunk was a security officer's uniform. And I looked at him and I said, "That yours?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I work 2 jobs. I get off the security job and I ride Uber all day." And is that the story of this valley? Is that what people are doing? How are they making a living?
Certainly, and there are too many stories like that. And for us, the challenge is twofold. Obviously, it's the extraordinary housing costs, and the other is really the ability for us to create on-ramps to prosperity. Before Google Maps came around, the most frustrating experience for any driver was trying to get an on-ramp on a freeway when you knew the freeway was right there, but you just couldn't find the on-ramp. That is the experience for thousands of our teenagers who would love to be able to get on this incredible on-ramp, on the on-ramp to this incredible route of Silicon Valley, but there is simply no one to be able to provide them that path, particularly to get to college, which we know is the critical necessity for even getting into it.
Are there forces working against that, or is it just that no solutions have been conceived of?
Oh, there are great solutions out there, and we're working on a lot of them, and there's some mayors throughout the country who are working on them, and great nonprofits and companies. But the reality is we need to be able to scale, and we're able to demonstrate real success among segments of the population, and the question is, how can we really have a big impact? We just launched last year a San Jose Works program focusing on seeing how we could get teenagers living in gang-impacted neighborhoods their first job. What we saw in our burglary data was that in a section of the city, over 600 burglaries, over half of them were committed by juveniles. So it was clear that the gangs were getting to our kids before we were. So the plan was, great, let's see how many jobs we can get. 1,200 teenagers got their first job this year as a result of this effort. But as we think about the need of a city of 1 million people, 10th largest city in the country, we know we've got a long way to go. So we're having success. Now we have to scale.
Well, we're going to let you continue this conversation. I'm going to, because we're going to welcome some of your fellow mayors, I'm going to ask you to come, not go away, but to stay over there. And I'm going to welcome the other mayors who are also on the front lines of this issue. So to join the conversation, please welcome Donna Rutherford, the outgoing mayor of East Bay Palo Alto.
All right.
Patrick Burt, the outgoing mayor of Mountain View. I'm sorry, of Palo Alto.
See Pat.
I've got my geography. I'm working on the geography. And finally, that's great. That's great. And finally, Pat Showalter, the mayor of Mountain View. And here to lead the conversation, please welcome Kim-Mai Cutler of TechCrunch. Tim, hi. Take it away. Thank you.
So I think that there were going to be some slides that were going to come up here, or not. I started writing about these issues a couple years ago as a third-generation Bay Area resident. I was actually born here in Mountain View. My father was born in Palo Alto, and we've been deeply involved in the industry, since the 1950s, basically. So I think where I want to start off is just kind of an opening question, for each of you about what you're hearing from your constituents and communities, and I can provide a little bit of context for every city. So. Pat from Mountain View. Mountain View, of course, is the headquarters of Google, and you've kind of been at the center of it all. What are your constituents telling you? And another thing, they're actually one of the cities that's actually building housing in a significant way, or starting to explore it around the Google campus. So if you could kind of tell me a little bit about what your community is telling you now, or what you're seeing.
Well, our community is really committed to having a diverse range of people.
Yeah.
And we realize that in order to do that, we have to have a lot more homes.
Right.
And so 2 years ago at the election, there was quite a discussion about whether or not we should rezone this area we're in right now, called the North Bayshore, for housing. And all of the candidates who were for housing won. Mm-hmm. And we immediately amended the general plan so we could study housing in the North Bayshore, and we're producing the zoning for that. Mm-hmm. And we hope to be able to produce maybe as many as 10,000 units out here. Mm-hmm. But the community is really committed, I think, generally to that. At the same time, we kind of suffer from the perils of prosperity.
Yep.
And those
them well.
those two perils are not enough housing and bad traffic. And it's how to to balance those two. And we think that building housing is an excellent mitigation for traffic, because if people live close to their jobs, then there's a lot less traffic. Another part of that is people really want to have a bikeable and walkable community. So we're working very hard, as are many of our neighbors, to produce a community that's much more comfortable to be on a bike. I think for a long time, especially with our great weather, people who were very brave and exceedingly athletic have been happy on the roads. But we're making the roads a lot more friendly, and we're producing trails.
Great.
And
then. Do you mind if I?
No.
Yeah.
So those are
Pat
the things.
Comes from Palo Alto, which I would think in the history of the valley, it's actually the birthplace, or the true birthplace of Silicon Valley. It's the HP garage came out of I believe the Palo Alto house of the very first mayor, one of the very first mayors of Palo Alto, who decided to subdivide his property, and then Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard started HP there. But today. Pat, you have a slightly different philosophy, which is around, emphasizing fewer jobs, right?
Well, not fewer jobs. Actually, not something
fewer
so
tech
different.
Jobs.
A reduced rate of growth of tech jobs, not a diminishment.
Okay.
So it's really not very different from what Pat was talking about in Mountain View. When they rezoned this area here for more housing, they took that property out of potential development for new office and commercial growth, and the big three companies in this area basically bid for rights for what they were going to allow in the next amount of office growth. So in Palo Alto, we're doing similar things. Our general plan is looking to increase the rate of housing growth and decrease our rate of job growth.
And so the general plan is what, like 6,000 units over the next 15 years or something? Right.
That's right.
Okay. Okay.
But we've already, we passed a general plan about 5 years ago, and we've already built the housing and the office space that was in it, because we've had such a big boom. So we are a step ahead. in terms of that. I'm glad to hear that you're following suit, though. That's good news. That's good news, Pat.
But the other part that we're
And
focused on is actually looking at what we think is an under-recognized need to balance the equation. So to solve the transportation and housing problems, this region, which has been growing at, in the last 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, we added 500,000 jobs and 68,000 housing units in the region. At that pace of job growth, principally driven by high-paid tech jobs, if we were to actually triple our rate of housing growth in the region, which would be phenomenal, and continue with that rate of job growth, we would fall further behind. Not stay even, not catch up, but by tripling the rate of housing growth, as long as we grow jobs and principally tech jobs at that rate, we'd fall further behind.
I'm curious.
So how can we
you guys
address
think
this without also looking at what is arguably an unsustainable rate of tech job growth? When we have a healthy Silicon Valley economy, which I've been in tech for 35 years, we have healthy tech job growth. That's at a rate like this. We're at a rate like that. It's not sustainable for our region, and we are, as a result, squeezing out middle and modest and lower income people who are essential to a real economy and society. You can't have a society of all software workers making $150,000 a year. That's not.
You know,
Oh, do you want to?
yeah,
I think I want to weigh in on this. And
good.
when I was introduced, actually, it's East Palo Alto. And East Palo Alto is a small community nestled between our neighboring cities of Menlo Park and Palo Alto. I come from a very different perspective on affordable housing. I come from the perspective that East Palo Alto for a long time has been overlooked. And when we decided to become incorporated in 1983, so that we could have say in our destination, which has always been a low-income community pretty much, that we wanted our residents to have a place that they could feel at home. Now, in 2000, we had redevelopment, which revitalized our community, brought in a Kia, the Ravenswood 101 Retail Center, and some other businesses, and new housing, which attracted high-tech, high-income professionals who happened to be Google employees and Facebook employees. So that impacted our housing stock because it ended up pushing out longtime residents in East Palo Alto. We have 57% rentals in East Palo Alto. Now, I applaud my neighbors. However, East Palo Alto is a leader in affordable housing. We have produced more affordable housing than the county. And we continue to do that. However, we want to make sure that we keep our longtime residents here. So, thank you. And we will,
Please, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'll jump in later.
Oh, no, I just struck, I appreciate East Palo Alto's leadership. I think this is really emblematic of the competing paradigms we've got right now in this country. We've got a new administration coming in the White House that's talking about a zero-sum game, building walls, excluding trade, excluding immigrants. And the Silicon Valley paradigm is a very different one. It's about bounty. And if our paradigm is going to win in the end, the legacy of the Silicon Valley is going to be judged by what happens in East Palo Alto and in East San Jose. The fact that there is fabulous retail and wonderful office development in great cities like Mountain View and Palo Alto is wonderful, but that is not how Silicon Valley is going to be judged. If we're leaving entire generations of kids behind, if working class families have to move hours away, So really, this is the crux of the matter is what's happening in East Palo Alto or East San Jose or other struggling communities.
So the question I have for all of you, as someone who currently lives in San Francisco, in our board of supervisors, we have African-American supervisors representing the Fillmore and the Western Addition and the Bayview. We have Asian-American supervisors representing the West Side, like the Sunset District. We have, white supervisors from the northern neighborhoods and, Latino supervisor and David Campos from the Mission District. And they're all in one room, and it is, it's not pleasant or fun. It's often very, very ugly a lot of the time, but they are at least in one room communicating with each other about their very, very different needs of their very, very different constituencies. But here in Santa Clara County, each of you have your own city council. You're kind of negotiating things for whatever your own community is, whether they're really affluent or low income. But there's I don't see a strong mechanism for negotiating out all of your respective needs with each other. So what are your responsibilities to each other as neighboring cities and communities?
Well, I have to say that actually our neighboring cities, we have been collaborating on a lot of different issues. And looking forward, I'm sure we will continue. As a matter of fact, East Palo Alto has a very serious water problem. And we actually put a moratorium on construction, which is certainly going to affect our ability to produce more housing. And we have a city-owned site that's waiting to build 120 affordable units of housing. And we are working with the city of Palo Alto and Mountain View to transfer some water so that we can follow through on our construction and our housing, and also job creation. We have 0.32 jobs per capita. So, we remain optimistic that we will get the water that we need. And, it's a environmental justice kind of situation. And we get the lowest allotment of water in the whole San Mateo County. And we're about at our capacity. So we're in dire straits, but East Palo Alto has survived many struggles and challenges over the year. We are a young city, but obviously it's a place now that is very affordable for surrounding communities and employers who want to be able to bike and walk to work. There was a time when East Palo Alto was not a place that anybody wanted to be other than the residents that lived there and knew that eventually East Palo Alto would be recognized as a place that people want to be.
We do have an organization called the Cities Association, the Santa Clara Cities Association, and I hope there's a similar one in San Mateo. It is county-centric, and we do collaborate on many things through that and share knowledge about all sorts of things that come up and make suggestions of model ordinances that we can share. One of the things that we worked on recently was together was the minimum wage and raising the minimum wage, and we came up with a model ordinance that many of the communities have passed. Mountain View had already passed one, so we were very, very happy that the other communities wanted to join, because the things, the main drawback seemed to be not having a level playing field. So this is going to create a much more level playing field, which is great. So there's that. And then on many different subjects, we have collaborations. For instance, on the transportation measure that just passed, the mayors of Silicon Valley got together to work on the allocation of that would be on the ballot, and to come up with one that we felt was, thank you, I'm not used to all this stuff, that we felt was much more oriented toward the needs of the people, i.e. getting people to work. So we do collaborate, but you can't do it enough. There's so much strength in working together, and none of these problems that we have respect our city boundaries. So it's really important to do that.
So when Santa Clara County was built out largely in the 50s and 60s, it used to be a lot of orchards and like agricultural land, and then it was turned into these very inexpensive subdivisions. And like I've gone back in the historical records, and there's a very famous mid-century modernist developer named Joseph Eichler who when he first built homes were cost 1.5 times the median income here in the Bay Area in 1950, and now they're up to 10 to 1. And when you look at out of all this space, the office parks, the highway infrastructure, the single-family homes, which are now, effectively luxury items at this point. I mean, does this urban form, does it make sense? To what extent should we preserve it, or what should it look like going forward for the next generation?
I'll just say no. The suburban sprawl isn't working for us. We see it on our freeways every morning and every afternoon, and it has huge impacts in terms of equity as well. We know the lack of density of housing, particularly near services, near transit, is a huge disadvantage in a lot of communities as many families are left out. And as we look to densify in San Jose, and we're building 25, 30-story towers near BART stations that are planned and a lot of other transit, the challenge is bringing everybody along. And we know that there are some communities that are simply not going to want to grow in that way. The problem, I think, Pat illustrated, they're doing everything they can to slow the jobs down.
Does that make sense to you?
It does for Palo Alto. The challenge is whether or not employers are going to recognize the importance of actually locating near transit and locating near where their talent is located, where their workers are. A quarter of Apple's employees live within the city of San Jose. They recently figured that out and bought a 4 million square foot site. That's great, but before that, they wouldn't go south to even look at it. And then they realized, oh, wait a minute, our workers are here. Getting the jobs near the housing is critical, and it's critical particularly to overcome the economic barriers that we see right now. They're pretty profound between the 650 area code in the north and 408 area code in the south. We recognize that the jobs and the wealth tend to be focused more in the north. And until that is better integrated, there simply aren't going to be more opportunities.
We have, in this upturn, we've seen that the land value within a mile or so of Caltrain stations has spread greatly between like approximately a 2x value versus out a few miles further away. So I think that all of the communities on the Caltrain line are seeing that that's not only job center locations, but housing center locations. Our two downtowns that each have Caltrain stops are where we're planning on putting the bulk of our new housing. But as Mayor Showalter spoke about, we had a consortium of North and West County mayors who rallied together to get now what was out of our county transportation tax, $1 billion toward Caltrain, which had never occurred before. And then finally, as Mayor Rutherford had spoken about, we do have other opportunities that are informal collaborations that are actually quite strong. So East Palo Alto and Menlo Park are in a different county. They're San Mateo County from Palo Alto, but they're actually our strongest collaborations. We're in a joint flood control district with East Palo Alto, and we've just begun a tremendously important project to protect homes in East Palo Alto. We're in the process of transferring 500,000 gallons per year of water of our allocation to East Palo Alto, who fairly deserves that water allocation and was deprived of it when that was created through San Mateo County 30 years ago. And then we have a joint recycled water initiative to have a sustainable water supply, which Mayor Rutherford and I have sat on the creation of. So we have a lot of collaborations, but unfortunately we don't have the right governance structures to do it as strongly as we should.
I mean, do you see that manifesting in something like ABAG or MTC? Sorry, ABAG is the Association of Bay Area Governments. It's from 1960, and then the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is where federal transit and infrastructure dollars get sent in through the Bay Area, and those are the primary kind of regional bodies that we have now, but they're not entirely that strong.
Yeah, I think we get the government we deserve to some extent. In California, we're very suspicious. Easy for me to say, right? I'm the government. So, we're very suspicious in California of concentration of power.
Right.
And folks don't want to give it up for some centralized metropolitan agency like you might see in Portland, for example. But where we've seen the greatest successes, for example, over the last year, we passed an almost $1 billion affordable housing measure countywide, a $6.5 billion transit and transportation measure countywide. Those things that can really move the needle on equity really require everybody giving up their turf. Not an easy thing to do. We're starting to see some of that emerge. But now when you talk about the level of MTC and ABAG, now you're talking about 99 cities and towns with their own fiefdoms and way too many egos. I can tell you, I've sat on those boards for a long, long time, and it is very hard to get consensus to move forward.
So one question I want to ask is, what is the leverage or negotiating power that a city should have against one of these very, very giant companies? So for example, I mean, within, a very small mile radius of here, the Bay Area has 3 of the most valuable companies in the world by market cap, and those would be Alphabet / Google, Apple, and Facebook. And as you said earlier, Apple, when Steve Jobs was getting approval for Apple Campus 2, which is that donut ring thing, which will add 14,000 workers to Cupertino, it came out that only 8% of Apple's workers actually live in Cupertino, a quarter live in San Jose, 14% live in San Francisco. But the only city that gets to collect, municipal tax revenue from the world's most valuable company is Cupertino, and all the other surrounding cities are sort of left with the consequences. And so, I know that you have those negotiations with Google, and I know that East Palo Alto has some to some extent with Facebook. What can you do, or what can you negotiate in terms of community benefits, and what should you negotiate in terms of community benefits?
Well, that's a really good question, and we have worked with Google and will continue to work with Google on many different things.
I'm curious, what percentage of your city budget comes from Google? Do you know, or?
No, not much.
Yeah.
We have some very substantial ground leases because Google's buildings sit on Mountain View property.
Yeah.
And we've renegotiated those ground leases, but we don't get much sales tax, if any, from Google because they don't, their product isn't a physical product. So that is something that's changed, I think, in the last 15 years that really the taxing system hasn't caught up with.
Yeah.
Not
U.S. Steel.
Yeah. When we're in the negotiation process for zoning changes, that's a time when we can talk to them about community amenities. And really, Google has been fairly helpful with that. I mean, it's their city too.
But they're also like a almost $600 billion company.
I know.
So just couple 10 million things here for there shouldn't be that much to them, right? So.
Agreed.
I can't really disagree with that, and yet at the same time, it's their money.
Uh-huh.
And we have to work with them as congenially as possible, and we have to create a community that is welcoming and friendly and and cordial. So all of these things about how can we get the community benefits we need, and how can Google get what they need to run their business. I mean, it's something that we work on every day.
Yeah, I think Pat's right. I think cities have about 15 minutes of leverage when you're talking about a major multinational tech company that can be anywhere. Every city would love to have them. I find that our most productive relationships aren't extracting community benefits. It's much more in Facebook wants to launch a technology that will link digital India. Can we test it out in downtown San Jose? We say fantastic. We'll be your platform for innovative technologies, and let's see how we can benefit low-income residents with gigabit-level internet service. Those are the partnerships that work. Community benefits are, for the most part, diminishing returns.
Let me add something to that because it's very important to understand that Facebook is not in East Palo Alto.
Yep, they're in Menlo
However,
Park.
they do impact our traffic, and they impact our housing. They have reached out to East Palo Alto residents and businesses and nonprofits to work with us. We do want to receive community benefits because we don't have the type of money that San Jose has, Palo Alto has, or Mountain View. So, as a matter of fact, we had a settlement with Facebook, and they're giving $10 million towards housing. So,
Is that part of the $20 million they announced the other week?
yes.
Yeah. So for context, like, you know, it costs around, I mean, at least in San Francisco, I don't know what your cost structure is for building a unit of affordable housing, but just to build a unit of affordable housing is like $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
So like $10 million. I mean, not that this is the way it's going to be spent, but you know, it's like 20
Well,
housing,
we
units
just
of housing.
also passed a measure that's going to bring 1.8 million in on housing. So we have
Yeah.
two measures, and the voters approved them, so that's more money towards housing. But the benefits for East Palo Alto are important because as people are pushed out that don't want to be,
Right.
we need some leverage to weigh in on the fact that it is impacting our community.
But, you know, like 10 million is obviously nowhere.
It's
so
really
what,
a drop in the bucket, but it's helps.
Something.
It helps.
And
Absolutely.
for Mountain View, I think Google has been very interested in the housing and the need to improve the supply of housing. They have really been a strong advocate for that, and we've needed that advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been good, and they also have been generous to some of our charities, like Silicon Valley at Home has gotten a donation of, wasn't it $1 million? I think for the next 2 years to work on helping people who were being displaced with really protection against becoming homeless. And those services are vital to our community because, like, as the rents rise in Mountain View, people who are less prosperous are getting pushed out, and that's a severe problem.
But I do think that at the heart of your question is a disconnect between, first, software companies are not great tax revenue generators, whether for Cupertino or otherwise.
From a city perspective.
No.
Correct.
Yeah, but from a state level, so
Well,
much of the wealth of the industry is captured through like personal income and capital gains taxes that
That's right.
then go up through the state, but the cities actually themselves don't have that
That's
much
right.
leverage over companies, given the way that the tax structure works in California.
And so we have a number of our tech companies that are progressive and care about regional issues and are stepping forward, whether through philanthropic means or otherwise. But there's a gulf between the problems that are occurring as a result of the incredible explosion in tech job growth and what these philanthropic contributions are actually doing.
Sure.
And it's not a small difference, it's a gulf. And we are hesitant to say, well, we got a big problem because we have companies that are market cap of, as you said on Google, 600, Alphabet, $600 billion or so.
Yeah, it's like close to 6
And, Facebook, similar
It's like
sorts of
300.
things. And they're providing tens of millions of dollars in impact mitigations.
Mm-hmm. What do you, I mean, if you don't think community benefits is the right structure, then what do you think is the right, like, regional, would you look at regional tax sharing, or what could work?
Well, we love that because we know we know that the employer per capita ratio tends to increase as you go further north. But it depends what you're talking about, relationships between cities or relationships with companies. As I think about our relationships with tech and companies, it's really about, they want to do something that's impactful and is different, is innovative in some way. And so, partnerships that get them engaged in that way, I think are much more fruitful than us just going to them and saying, we deserve your money because we have poor people. And they, that is not one that tends to get a great response. I do think that, there's a basic challenge to Silicon Valley. The secret sauce of our success has been our great diversity. Half of our venture-funded startups were founded by an immigrant, and which is a great thing. At the same time, that means their emotional connection in terms of where they give and philanthropy, it may be closer to Bangalore or Shanghai than it is in San Jose. And so being able to draw them in and engage them in a meaningful way, particularly when 2/3 or 3/4 of their customers may be elsewhere in the world, is a challenging thing. And so you have to make the case that they'll be doing something different around education, around poverty or housing.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the last question I have is around, accountability, in the sense that, my family's been here for so long, and I look at there's so little inventory overall in terms of housing. Like San Francisco maybe sells, not builds. There's about 6,000 units of housing that are sold per year in San Francisco. When you look at Palo Alto, there's maybe 60 units for sale at any given time. The inventory is extremely, extremely tight. And so for me as a younger person who would like to stay here, I mean, the only realistic options I have long term to be here are probably in the East Bay, and then I'm going to go and impact communities obviously there. So, there are these general plans and these zoning plans, but ultimately, the tools that we have at the state level are not, there's no teeth to them. So I'm wondering, how can we make sure that, at least for the next generation, that you're actually going to build the housing that you've ostensibly committed to in your plans? And if not, is there something that we can do at the state level to ensure that?
Yeah, I think the key is we've got to find a way to get out of the way. I'm a strong supporter of environmental regulation, but CEQA is killing us right now when we're trying to build a high-rise in downtown San Jose, and they're holding it up for CEQA suits because it causes traffic. A lot of folks who don't care that much about the environment are using CEQA in ways that are really inhibiting our ability to build a lot of housing. And, we tried to just cut fees in the last council last night at 2:30 in the morning as we were all sitting around to vote. And just to cut construction fees just drew an enormous amount of opposition from those groups who felt that they had entitlement at some point to blocking housing production. And so we've got to find ways to get some of those tools of those who want to stand in the way of housing production out of the way.
I would say that a good portion of it also is that under our current tax structure, we don't have funding systems for government to really participate in an adequately meaningful manner in addressing housing or transportation problems. When we have mayors from Europe come or elsewhere in Asia, and we'll talk about funding mechanisms, and they have funding they basically build massive amounts of housing in their communities and invest in huge amounts of transportation. And we also in Palo Alto have a very strong collaboration on technology innovations and smart city movements and smart mobility that's going on. But merely saying that those kinds of collaborations are the sorts of solutions that we need when we have amongst the world's most affluent companies who are benefiting and choosing to continue to expand here, in part because we have comparatively low taxation systems that would address the impacts of their growth, and we need to fix that.
And I would like to add that in East Palo Alto, rent control is probably a bad word. However, it is one of the ways that we keep residents that are low income and who cannot afford to buy a house. It's one of our strongest protections. And that's a very good question that you ask, because if you can't afford to live close to where you work, it is a big problem. And we certainly want to build more housing in East Palo Alto that's affordable to our young people. And we will fight hard to continue to do that. I would just encourage other cities to build more housing that is affordable.
Boy,
and there
we're
are
almost out of
ways
time,
to do
so,
that.
yeah.
There are ways to do that, and not just, say that, oh, we're building housing and it's in communities of color.
Right.
So it needs to be of all incomes everywhere.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think another thing is that in the Bay Area, there needs to be sort of a change in the political will.
Yep.
And I think that we need to all embrace the idea that more sprawl is very bad. and that living in a dense urban area, particularly a transit-oriented area, can be a fabulous lifestyle. And I think that as we do that, the market will respond. I hope so, anyway. I think that in Mountain View, we're changing a lot of zoning and doing a lot of building, but we need everybody in the region to do that because we've underbuilt for a mere 40 years. So we all need to embrace the idea of a walkable urban area and think going up is okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.